Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Women Talking Money podcast. My name is Gretchen from Magenta Financial Planning, and today I'm delighted to welcome Charlotte Woodward to join me. Charlotte is an experienced regional development manager at Eden Tree Investment Management, a company that's dedicated to responsible and sustainable investment. With a strong track record in driving regional growth, Charlotte excels in building client relationships, identifying opportunities to add value for the people that she's dealing with, and implementing successful strategies. So welcome, Charlotte, and thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. So we'll get started. We're talking about money. And so tell me a little bit about maybe what you heard about money when you were growing up, or if you talked about money as a family.
Yeah, sure. So I think when I was growing up, I came from sort of a middle class background. I was very, very lucky, was given lots of different opportunities to do various different clubs, was privately educated for part of my school life. But never really actually spoke about money very much. So I didn't really have an understanding of actually how much all of those clubs and activities cost, or, even going to private school. But one of the things that was always kind of drummed into me from a very young age was to be very careful with money. So even with my parents, if they would lend me any money for any reason, which, I think we all probably, I certainly do with my own children, and maybe we've sort of been lucky enough to experience that in the past. I always paid back every single penny. I was never given anything. And if I would borrow, I don't know, £9.51, I would get the exact amount of change back from a £10 note. It would never be sort of rounded up or rounded down.
And so do you remember your parents kind of how they instilled that? Were they quite strict around that kind of, when they gave you money, it was like, oh, it was for a specific thing, or how do you think that played out?
Yeah, so I don't think so growing up, we weren't given sort of like pocket money as such. So there was like, I think like £10 a month or something that was saved towards us. So then when we were 18, we had this kind of pot of money to then, the idea was, I suppose, buy our first car or insurance, etc. And I made some bad decisions when I was kind of around that age, but my parents did lend me the money to buy my first car. And I remember my dad keeping this spreadsheet, and it literally had every date, every payment I'd made back to him. It had what it was for, so that he could track exactly what had been paid. And I think because I didn't have, that pocket money element to it when I was growing up, if I wanted something and they were able to, buy me it, or I wanted to go out for the day or something like that, I didn't really learn the value of money, especially until I was a little bit older. I mean, I did have a part-time job from when I was about kind of 15, 16, but again, didn't really have like that concept of it, I don't think.
And so quite interesting, you can kind of acknowledge that maybe you didn't have that learning. So how was that? Like, how did that go? You also mentioned, you'd made some mistakes, when you first got that money. So talk to me a bit more about that.
Yeah, so I think I really feel that learning to budget and learning about finances is actually a subject in itself that's just as important as like anything that they learn at school. And, no one ever spoke about it at school. My parents never really spoke about the cost of things. So I couldn't have told you what, a pint of milk would have cost when I was younger, or, the cost of petrol or anything like that. So I think because I didn't have that experience, when I then had any sort of money, whether it be from working or that pot of money that had been saved for me for when I was older, I just sort of spent it quite impulsively on things that I wasn't kind of thinking about the longer term impact, or also what other financial costs associated with that there could be. So I think, right, well, I'll buy a car, but how do I have insurance or tax or MOT or any of those things? So I don't think I would get myself into situations where they would have to then give me money to get me out of it, because I would go and, for example, buy a car, but then not be able to insure it or do anything like that. And I wouldn't have really like looked into it or planned for it. I would have just done it, one morning I'd wake up and think, that's what I want to do. So I think it made it really difficult actually to know about what day to day just costs what you need, just going to the shop and buying a drink or something like that. I think as well a lot, back then I did everything in cash, so I think cash is really difficult to manage and actually track what you're spending. So because I would go to the bank, I remember, I think it was like Northern Rock before they went bust. So I'd go to the bank in Kingston, and I remember taking my ID with me and taking out this cash and just spending it, because I had no idea how much I had. I couldn't see like a balance or anything like that. So yeah, would just spend it and not really kind of think of the consequences. And I think also because I had been very lucky when I was younger, I never had to worry about money. So I think having had that background, you just assume that that is the norm, because that is what you feel is normal. Whereas for so many people, it isn't. And actually then for me, as I grew up, it wasn't. But I didn't think about that at the time. Just sort of felt like I had to spend it rather than like could have saved it. That was the only option, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think it's a hard one because I think it's something echoed across teenagers across the UK. And I can
Yeah.
hear, as you were talking, I could hear things in my head going, "Well, I was like that too," but my brother wasn't. Like, he saved for a car with his first job, and I don't know
Yeah.
how he learned those things. He didn't learn, in the same environment. So there's an element of like, it's not just learning, it's like, are you interested in it? And when you're 16 or 18 or all of those things. So it's really interesting when we think about it. And I think you're right,
Yeah.
budgeting is a massive thing, and a topic. I like your words, topic in its own right. I think that's really important. Talking about budgeting
Yeah.
then, so do you have a budgeting system that you follow now?
Um, Not so much still now, and I definitely should do better. So, um, when I was younger, no, absolutely nothing at all. And now I really like there's lots of things that I like the idea of. So I like the idea of, I've seen like videos of cash stuffing, like the cash envelope stuffing. So you actually
Mm.
put the cash in the envelopes. I like the idea of, the spending insights that you can see on banking apps and things like that. Again, but although they're quite inaccurate, so it can be a little bit difficult to actually understand them. But one thing that I did do was make sure that all of my bills were kind of set up to go out on the same day. So I know that once my bills have gone out, the rest of that money is kind of separate. And there's still obviously like the food shops and things like that I need to do throughout the month, but at least the bulk of everything is kind of done and gone. And I kind of feel like if you can't see it, you don't miss it as much. So that's one of the things. But it is actually something that I keep thinking that I need to work more on, because as much as I'm so much better than I was in terms of saving money, I'm still not fantastic, as to how I could be anyway. And I think it's just trying to find the right thing. Like going back to what you said about, how do some people learn it? They've been in the same environment. I think a lot of it is personality dependent, and also enjoyment as well. So if I'm feeling like a bit down, then actually just going out and buying myself something does sometimes make me feel better. But for me, it's not really always for myself. It's normally for the kids or for somebody else, which is not necessarily ideal. But yeah, I think
Yeah,
I'm
it's that
struggling to work
emotional
better.
spend is a
Yeah,
big. Everyone feels good about, it can
yeah,
make anyone feel good, but it's about, yeah, whether how we control that, and whether we've got a budget for the emotional, that bit that we know that we're going to
absolutely.
need is,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's it. And I think as well, like when I want to do something, I'm either like 100% in, or I'm like not in at all. So I couldn't just buy one small thing. I'd have to completely redesign the bedroom or something like that. And I remember actually this year thinking about Christmas trees, and I have always had the same Christmas tree decoration. So we get a real tree every year, but that's just kind of preference. But I've always bought one new decoration each year, and I normally get one with the year on. And then this year I thought, I just want to change my colour scheme. And I really had to talk myself out of it, because just buying Christmas decorations in a whole new colour scheme would be ridiculously expensive. So I think it's also, I'm better at that side of it as well. But yeah, definitely having that almost allocation within your budget for that emotional spend. And I like to call part of my budget idiot tax, which is where I've just forgotten to, pay for the parking when I've left a car park or driven in a bus lane or something like that. So those things that, you just make silly mistakes with that you don't necessarily mean to do. But you never budget for them, do you? You don't plan to go and get, a parking fine or something like that. So actually having that as a bit of a buffer I've also found quite useful.
Yeah, that's interesting. So in addition to an emergency fund, like an idiot tax fund, I like that.
And that is me. And normally I need to go into the emergency fund as well as the idiot tax fund once that's empty.
Yeah.
So yeah, but it's all very loose. And I would actually really like to firm it up. But again, I don't know. I just need to find a way that works for me, and I haven't quite found that. Even after all of this time, I'm working in financial services, but it just shows that there isn't really one size that fits all.
I really like that discussion, Charlotte, because I'm working on a project at the moment trying to think about budgeting for women, and I think that's really true. Like there are rules of thumb that I can give people as examples, and you're right, there's a lot of stuff now around the envelope stuffing. There was another thing that was brought up around the box that you can tick off like all the different amounts and save for a specific thing in that box and gimmicks like that. But I guess it's finding out what works really, really well for you and trying to find the thing that can kind of control some of those impulse things, or like with your Christmas tree, but something that goes no because I can't afford it, not because that's just I know that I don't have the budget for that, or I do have the budget to do that. It's like that empowerment, isn't it, of like working it through.
I think also my perception of money for different things is so off sometimes. So I could easily spend a significant amount of money on something, whereas buying something much smaller that would cost much less feels much more difficult and feels more expensive. So I won't do it, even though, I may just go and spend, I don't know, I'm trying to think of an example now, but like say I had bought the Christmas tree decorations, I could go and spend, a few £100 buying those decorations, but then actually buying a pair of shoes for myself, or like some new trainers or a coat or something like that maybe, 30, £40 feels too much to spend. So again, sometimes my perception of actually what is expensive and what is appropriate to spend money on is slightly off, and it tends to be, again, more myself that I won't spend the money on, whereas I can spend much more than I should do on other people. And again, I think that a lot of that comes actually from childhood, and maybe some of the areas where I think I could have done things differently. It's almost that, not punishment, but like, because it's not doing it for me, it doesn't feel like a bad thing. How can anyone be critical of me for, I know, spending £300 on the kids' Christmas presents or something like that, because it's not on me. So yeah, I think there's definitely like a psychological link there.
It's almost like deflecting that bad bit to something else and going, as you say, how could it be bad if it's for this? Yeah, interesting. And so what about debt? How do you approach, what's your approach to debt?
So again, this was a major problem for me when I was younger. So I first started working in financial services. I kind of fell into it, actually, like most people, I think, maybe have done. And I fell pregnant with my son while I was at university. And so dropped out of university and just needed like a stable job. And the first that was the first time I really had any kind of sort of solid income. So before that point, I had continued to live a lifestyle that I couldn't afford to live through, different reasons. Some was impulse spending, some was, other spending that other people were kind of doing on my behalf. And so I basically lived from payday loan to credit card, and never was able to pay them off because I never had the income to actually pay the credit card or pay the payday loan. So I would go from a fairly market standard credit card to a bad credit card where the APR was much more expensive, and I almost just used that as like, I don't know, in my head, a bit of a gift from those companies. And I think then when I obviously defaulted on those, again, at that time had no kind of concept of credit scoring, credit history, the impact that that would have and for how long. So never really thought much sort of it. And the first time that I did that, my parents actually paid off that debt for me. Sort of said, don't do it again. But there was never any like real learning or like lesson or conversation about it. So I then literally went and did the same thing again. So took out the same credit cards, the same payday loans, because I was then able to do it. Because that it had been paid off. And again, you know, that was when paydays were really common. You had, I think, Provident like used to come and knock on the door and actually collect the money for you. And I think also those companies, they weren't set up to actually make sure that you were able to afford the repayments, that you were that they were responsibly lending to you. They were just there. You know, I remember sitting down with this guy who turned up from Provident, and I was at my friend's house and she had a Provident loan, and I was like, oh, well, you know, I could do with that. And she was saying, oh, well, I'm going to go shopping tomorrow. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to come shopping too. So he's saying, what's your earnings? And I had like, I think I was working part-time in Waitrose at the time or something like that. So I was going, oh, you know, well, this is how much I have. And he said, well, I'm going to put this on the form. So it was so like crazy to think that that's how it worked then, but it was so common. And I think obviously that's why there's been so much change and regulation around them now. But yeah, so that was kind of my first experience of debt. And I then owed my parents that money. So and again, having mentioned already, you know, my dad had this spreadsheet, so he knew exactly what was owed. When I then got my kind of first job where I was having kind of an annual salary, which wasn't very much, it wasn't, you know, I wasn't like really well paid. I then didn't want to pay that off, because I was like, finally, I've got this money that I've actually earned, and I found it really difficult to pay back. But then I did. I just had to do it. Just had to pay it back. And actually, since then, I have only in the last year got a credit card, because it scared me so much that I could get back into that position. Obviously, that had a really negative impact on my credit file for a significant period of time, which has meant that up until very recently, I've not even been in a position to consider getting a mortgage or anything like that. So, and I've also, on the other side of it, not wanted to invest any money, because I haven't wanted to lose money. So whilst I've not wanted to lose money through debt, I've also not wanted to lose money through, you know, investing it anywhere. So I've just been quite happy to have it sat in a bank account for the last however much that I've managed to kind of save. So, which is again not the best use of any sort of funds. So yeah, I think it's been really kind of mixed with debt. I have just taken a credit card out. I am incredibly paranoid about paying off the entire balance before any interest starts to be charged. And again, when I first took that out, it was one of the not the worst credit rating ones, but you know, one for people that are trying to rebuild their credit score and credit history. And recently got approved for a more kind of high street lender, and it was such a huge achievement for me, because I've just never been able to do it. And that was, yeah, just like such a big goal that I kind of wanted to work towards. But again, I would not spend on it, because I'm just too worried about that building up and kind of those temptations of just pushing it to the next month or forgetting, which is so easy to do, or, you know, put it on the credit card, and again, you don't realize how quickly you've spent quite a lot of money.
It's really interesting though, isn't it? Because we all know that to get your credit rating to be better, you also will need to use some credit. And, you know, I've been talking to a client who's going through a divorce, and she has got plenty of money, but she can't get a credit card because she's had no credit history at all. And she wants it so that she can pay for a holiday, or, you know, those things that you want to pay on your credit card because it's better insured and things like that. And to be honest, there's been, you know, thank goodness we're not in the days that you were talking about of those lenders. But it's really scary when you escalate down, you know, and how quickly it escalates. And so I can understand the paranoia, definitely. You know,
it has it definitely has stuck with me for a really long time. And I think also really interesting, you said about kind of credit history, and I think that's the thing, because I then had, you know, like I was always obsessed with the score, and I've recently learned that it's nothing to do with the score. It's about what's kind of contained within your report. But then I didn't even want to apply for any credit because of having a hard search on my credit file. And then I would kind of spend sometimes when I would think about it, it'd pop into my head, and I would go on to multiple different sites and just do the pre-eligibility kind of checkers for different things. I wasn't going to take out any sort of loan or credit at that time, but I just almost wanted the reassurance that I was getting there. And it felt like such a kick in the teeth every single time when they were like, sorry, we can't approve you for this. And so to finally get there, it has been really good. And I remember, again, similarly to what you mentioned, when my grandfather passed away last year, and he had kind of always done all of the bills and the credit cards and things like that. And it was something that my grandma never really thought about, was actually then getting a credit card in her name. She wasn't able to get the credit limit that he had before. And so all of those things, it does have a massive, massive impact. I think even phone providers now as well, a lot of phone contracts have changed. So when I was younger, and even up until more recently, if you had a pay monthly contract, it would include your device as well as your airtime on the same bill. But a lot of people have moved away from that now, and they actually have a separate loan for the device, which is assessed completely differently. And I think because so many people, a common form of people's debt is phone bills and phone contracts. And again, that was another thing for me, was that when I was younger and having those payday loans, part of it was actually some sort of satisfaction for being approved for credit. It was almost like that validation. I knew that I had debt. I knew that I wasn't paying it off, but as long as I was still being approved for more credit, I felt okay about it, weirdly. And so I remember one point having 5 different contracts out with Vodafone. I only had one phone, so I don't know why I did it. But yeah, crazy decisions that I made, but without anybody to tell me that was, not the best choice, but also not wanting to talk about it because of the worry of what's going to happen. They're going to judge me. They've already had to pay off this debt and all of these kind of things that go along with it. Whilst at the same time,
yeah, there's a lot of shame. There's a lot of kind of, you don't want to talk about it because that shame or embarrassment and clearly, it's definitely something that triggers in you, isn't it? If you feel like, it's an interesting one. So we've talked a lot about that. And do you feel like the way you approach money now, then, whilst it's not, I think you've already admitted not quite, no one's perfect, but not still, sometimes not maybe as budgeting as you should. But do you think it has changed and you feel more equipped now?
Yeah, definitely. But I feel like that's come through my own learning and learning that I probably didn't have to go through to kind of have that. I think they always say, it's either a lesson or a blessing, I think is whatever the saying is. But we learn from our mistakes, and sometimes we have to make mistakes repeatedly, the same mistakes, to actually learn from them. I definitely think now I'm in a much better position. I've been able to kind of save money. And I actually found saving money just as addictive as spending it. But
it's giving a vibe of your personality, Charlotte, going on here. Definitely.
Yeah, definitely a personality trait. And I think, again, so one of the things that I think massively impacts me is, so I've recently been diagnosed with ADHD. Again, I have always had it, but when I was younger, it wasn't really a thing. It was just, you were, away with the fairies or whatever. So I think actually that has a massive, massive impact. And, I've now started actually medication for that. And it's made such a big difference to me and my ability to kind of control those impulses. And I'm not perfect, and I definitely still have them, but at least I can normally have a conversation with myself before I then go and buy whatever it was that I would have just normally bought already. But yeah, definitely. And again, seeing those round numbers. But then there are things that, I think banks make it really easy to do, like the rounding up. So if you have spare change, it will just automatically save it for you. But I don't ever choose to do any of those things. And I'm not really sure why. So again, I think there's definitely areas for me to work on and do better with. But yeah, I'm definitely much more knowledgeable. And again, especially around the credit cards, you know, knowing different sort of APRs and like the different offers you can get with interest-free periods and things like that. Again, I think it's a bit of a dangerous game, because you can kind of be lured into this false sense of security, because you think, oh, you know, I've got 18 months of interest-free on purchases, and then before you know it, you've done your whole credit limit and you're on the 17th month, and you think, oh, where am I going to find this money from? So yeah, I do think it is something that is um, yeah, much better. And I think actually that fear helps as well, in a way.
Yeah,
So
yeah. And I spoke to someone else who'd, been diagnosed with ADHD and the way that they manage their money. And I think, yeah, some of the impulsivity things that you're talking about, and your personality things, it makes sense, doesn't it? Then that
yeah,
diagnosis is obviously impacting some of the judgments and some of the things you do, and it's about finding your best approach.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think I'm also really lucky. So working in financial services now, I work with so many amazing people and firms. And actually, a lot of the conversations that I have day to day, I pick up bits from, and I actually take them away. And I think that's also made a really big difference in actually the way that I manage my own money, and um, you know, the way that I talk to my children about money, and so I think that does make a big difference as well, actually having those conversations and actively talking about it. Even though it's not necessarily, a sat down advice conversation, it's just, little snippets that you take and you think, oh, I'll try that. And actually you go away and it works. And sometimes, a few of those things, it doesn't replace the need for advice. And, probably would be really good for me to do that at some point. But I think I think that's also really helped.
Mm. And how are you finding, because you did mention it earlier around, saving and, enjoying, we've got to find this balance between living, you know, living for today and saving. You mentioned, the first job and owing your parents the money and not wanting to, but you did.
Yeah,
So, and obviously you've managed to, you've been saving and, getting to the stage where you can start to move forward with this credit history.
yeah.
So how are you managing to balance that? Because also, you live it, you're working in financial services. Where are you living? You're living in London as well. So,
So I live out just outside of London. So I live in Surrey. So it's expensive to live. And I think one of the ways that I kind of learned to manage that was, as I mentioned earlier on, having everything go out at the start, on payday, all the bills are set out to go. So I don't actually sort of have to do anything. I don't have to physically feel that pain almost of actually transferring a load of money for a bill. So I think that does make a difference. And I think one of the things that my best friend actually said to me, she said the worst case scenario in the majority of things in life is that it's going to cost you money. So that for me was like, okay, and actually it is really true. Not in everything, but in so many cases, actually, it's like I remember going on holiday with her, again, with for the first time that I'd actually been away for a really long time, and saying, "Are you sure we don't need to buy like a hold suitcase? So we don't need to buy an extra hand luggage?" She went, "It's fine, and the worst thing that's going to happen is it's going to cost us money when we get to the airport." But I never had that kind of worst case scenario buffer before, so actually just making sure that I've kind of got that still, and balancing that enjoyment, which is again something I'm not quite there yet with. So I will do it for other people, but I think I still hold this guilt of like spending money on myself almost. I do find it difficult, and I think it's because I don't know, maybe I don't trust myself. Maybe I think that I'll be critical of that decision, but sometimes I just have to go with it at the time and just trust that the universe has its plan for me in some sort of way. Um, and yeah, I think I mentioned as well, like sometimes my view on what is expensive for something will be very different. So again, like buying, I don't know, clothes for the kids or buying clothes for myself, I could spend very, very different amounts of money and have very different feelings about it. But I'm in a very lucky position, you know, that I have a job that is secure and stable. And one of the things that I also realize is that money can bring so much sadness and worry and, you know, negative emotions, but actually it is there to be enjoyed. We don't just go to work to pay the bills and that's it, because although, you know, that does keep a roof over our head and, you know, food in our mouths and etc etc, I think it is, there's that other part that, you know, you need to have that time for yourself. You need to have elements of self-care that, you know, inevitably do cost money in some way, shape or form. Because even if you just say, well, I'm going to go for a walk, and that's what I do for myself, I just go out and I will walk around a park, that doesn't cost anything. But you need, you know, a raincoat if it's raining, or you need appropriate shoes and things like that. So I think it's just getting that balance, that it's not too much, but it's not it's not like, it still needs to be done.
Yeah, and I think you're right. You know, we've talked a lot in this 30 minutes about, you know, negative stuff around money and debt and saving and how much is enough and all of those kind of things. And yeah, there's real joy if we've carved out something that's simple but that we can do together, or that might still cost money but that gives us that joyful feeling as well. And it's really important to recognize that. Is there something that you can
Yeah.
think of that you could share with me? I mean, you've shared about the park, but a joyful experience, you know, that you can look back and go, because I work and because I earn money, we've been able to do those things, that we can look back and go, that was amazing.
Yeah, I think definitely, like, the kids have experiences like on their own that I'm able to like, you know, give them the opportunity to do. So my son does a lot of theatre stuff, and I think one of the things that I also try and be really conscious of is being grateful for the really small things. So I think if somebody said to you, like, tell me 10 things that you're grateful for today, you'd probably really struggle after, you know, the fourth or the fifth, because we immediately go to those really big things. So I'm, again, like, it sounds really cringy, but I'm just really grateful that we can sit around together as a family and have a meal that I don't have to buy, you know, really cheap ingredients for, because I'm able to spend a little bit more on, you know, nicer eggs, for example, or, you know, different chicken, or whatever it is that we're eating. Um, we haven't yet been on a big holiday abroad, but that is on the cards for the next couple of years to do. And again, I want to do it in the right way. I was able to take the kids to Lapland, UK, a couple of years ago, which again was really expensive, and we've always just done, you know, Santa at the local garden centre. But to be able to do that was just incredible. So I think there's, you know, even from the really small things to also the big things, you know, like those holidays, um, is just really nice. Or even I mean, I like putting the girls in matching clothes, which they hate, but I just like to be able to do that and make those, you know, if I can give them an opportunity, then I do. My son just sent me his Christmas list a couple of days ago, and it just made me laugh so much, because I thought he had a really good concept and understanding of money, um, until his list was a gold chain. Although, in fairness, he did say that could be fake. But he did want real AirPods, a real Apple Pen, loads of branded clothing. And I thought, okay, we probably need to have a sit down conversation about this. Whereas, you know, again, going back to that personality thing, my daughter will put three things on her list, and they'll be because one of them is really expensive. So I think it's different. But yeah, I mean, I'm just really appreciative that we can do the small things, and even to be in a position where we could buy a house next year. So that is just incredible. By this time next year, hopefully I will be a homeowner. So
I mean, it's a massive achievement. You should be really proud.
thank you. Yeah, definitely really happy with where I've come from. But wish that I hadn't have had to take those steps along the way.
Yeah,
Although
maybe you took a bit of a hard route to get there.
yeah, but also as well, like, being kind to myself, because, you know, we all do things that we think probably could have done differently, and that's how I had to do it. That was how I needed to do it, to learn those lessons, to be in a position. I mean, if I hadn't have had my son when I did, I probably wouldn't have even been in financial services now. So I went to university to be a midwife, and I would never have been in the financial position. You know, I'd be absolutely exhausted working ridiculously long hours. I mean, it's amazing what, you know, the NHS staff do, because it's, yeah, I've tried it. It's definitely not for me. But also, like, financially, it's a very different package that comes with a job like this to the job that I do. And yeah, one of the biggest kind of also achievements for me was I wanted the kids to be able to go into school and be really proud of, you know, when they do the career days, like, what does your mum do for work? Or, you know, they always get the policemen or the, you know, paramedics or the doctors in, which is great. But I've gone into the school as a salesperson in financial services, and I just think that that's really cool. But they loved it. Like, they were so proud in those moments. And so seeing that on their face, and they've got no idea what I do day to day, but it's just to raise the awareness, I think is really cool.
Absolutely. Oh, well, thank you so much. I'm going to ask one last question,
Yeah.
which is around financial freedom. So everyone's got a completely different view about what financial freedom means, but what does it mean to you?
I think that's a really difficult question. And I think actually what it meant to me 10 years ago is probably very different to what it means to me now. Um, I don't see being debt free as being financially free or for having financial freedom, because I think actually there is debt that is not bad debt to have in some ways. It's just having it in the right places. So I think for me, it's just not having to be the day before payday with nothing in the bank, or worrying, you know, how am I going to pay for that? It's not having that anxiety that I've spent so many years having about money. And also being able to give back a little bit to my mum and dad, who did, you know, so much for me when I was younger to get me out of those holes financially. And now having that understanding of the cost of what they did when I was younger, with, you know, all those opportunities, being able to, you know, book something without having to just plan it for months and months and months and save. But yeah, I think that not having the worry about it in the same way, because obviously we always will worry about money in some way, but yeah, not to the same extent.
Well, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and thank you for
No,
taking the
thank
time
you.
today.
Thank you. It's been really great.